What's going on, everybody? You're watching Real Life with Duke White, and I am here with Gary and Kim Elliott, who are going to tell us about this amazing book and their ministry that they have going on. And I cannot wait to hear. I actually know about it, but we got to meet at NRB this past year, and it's been exciting to see. First of all, the content, guys. When you hear the content, you're not going to want to stop watching. But you guys have. Tapped into something that has been, I want to say, neglected by many conversations in the church, and even in Christian culture, and it has to do with relationships. And I know it's not February because that's the only time people in America want to talk about relationships, but we need to do a better job of that. That's weird to me. But and as you know, guys, you know I'm a man of few words. I'm just more like Gary, who sits there. I love this guy. But let's start. Let's get into it. Tell us about the book, and it's interesting because I started talking about relationships, but really we're talking about embracing singlehood.
Yeah.
So yeah, how did you find a desire to be in the ministry that encourages Christians to embrace being single?
We started out, because we started out single. How about that?
That's a good point. How do you do that?
I'll give a little bit of my history, and then Gary can give a little bit of his on where we got started. But for myself, I didn't have a lot of romantic experiences as a young adult. I actually was saving myself for love. I really kind of got bit by the idea that they're in destiny. So I was really holding out for that. And then I encountered a sexual violation of a rape that then I found out I was pregnant. So in those circumstances, I did end up choosing life and choosing to raise my daughter, which was the best decision that I've ever made next to marrying Gary. But that put me in a circumstance where not only was I wanting to guard my own heart, I was also wanting to guard her heart. So the idea of getting myself involved with anybody and everybody that would be interested, and then having not just my heart torn up, but hers as well. I asked God that for the one that he would have for me. And then I dove into the Bible to find out exactly how does he do this? I don't want to do it the way of the world. And in that, I learned that there's great purpose, there is abundant life, and there is wholeness for the single while you wait for the one that God would have for you. I'll let Gary share his history.
I had relationships when I was a teenager and beyond into my early 20s, a string of them for a while. And I did the only thing that I knew to do, which was follow what the culture taught. And unfortunately, the church also taught the same things the culture taught. There was nothing distinctive about it. And after a string of breakups and broken hearts and messes, I knew that there had to be something better. And so I did the same thing. I set out on a long study of the scriptures to find out, how do you really do this? How did you mean to do this? Because what we're doing really isn't working. It didn't work for me, and I know it didn't work for a lot of other people too. So when I did that, I found out one of the foundational truths that I repeat often is what the culture practices and what God originally intended for romantic relationships are not the same thing at all. So in the church, we've been following much of the culture more than the truth that's found in the scriptures.
Ooh, that is solid. Do you know what most people are thinking right now? Why is Duke so quiet? Like this never happens. Because this subject is one that, coming out of a divorce, but also, after my divorce, and then I was trying to find myself, my mother, her being mom, she found a box full of all my poems and things that I would write. And she's like, Duke, do you realize that every week you were in love with a different girl? And, she was like, you've never not had a girlfriend. And, it's like since the 5th grade, and so I'm going through this box. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I think I was more like, now that I look back, and the type of person that I was, before I became jaded, you know, but it's like, no, the type of person was, I think I was in love with love. The music is like, I want to know what love is. And
Sure.
then you got the movies. You watch people fall in love, grow old, and have grandchildren in an hour and a half. So they, and it's just one thing after another. There's these great adventures of love and all this, the secular world just did a great job at putting this idea of relationship, and that's the key to happiness. And they sold that to generations of people. And guys, you can act like you want that when you watch the movies. You're lying, and I know you're lying. Because it hit us all. It made us like, I want that kind of love. I want this kind of love. And then you go to church and it's not talked about at all. So to me, my personal understanding of relationship, did come from the world. Because they were the only ones talking about love and relationships. We know that God says he hates divorce. That's a pretty much the instruction that we get. It's like, if you can't control yourself, get married, and God hates divorce. Those are the two main things that it talks about. So when you say that coming from a relationship, or coming to a relationship from a biblical perspective, where do you see the Bible actually talking about relationships?
What we found is the ways that God does relationships are found in the stories. He doesn't map it out for us easily. We have to look between the lines a little bit. And it's not, when you have eyes to see that kind of stuff, it's not not difficult to find at all.
Right.
So that's where it all started, and it takes a little effort. If you're hungry enough, you want to find out what he really has to say. So then you'll put in the effort. So that's what I did, and I think that's what Kim did as well. Bouncing off what you just said, the American culture worships romantic love. And I think the reason it does that is because, we understand by the truth that Jesus is to be everything for us. And when he's everything, the romantic doesn't need to be elevated to degrees that it really can't fulfill. So it's Christ. It's Christ in you. And when it's Christ in you, your singleness is not a ball and chain anymore. He's the one that fulfills. He's the one that satisfies. He's the one that makes you, as you learn to be content, he's the one that does all this. And then when he adds the romantic into your life, it is a great blessing. And it's, as Kim puts it, it's the cherry on top of the sundae. So that's how we discovered it in the scriptures. And that's what we lived.
Yeah. So it's diving, I looked for dating, and I don't know if anybody else has looked for dating instructions in the Proverbs. There are none. Dating is not covered in the Bible. So what do you do? What is covered? And like Gary said, it's in the stories. Look at the love stories that have already been presented to us. And we know through the word also that he said the things that are hidden are worth digging for. He used parables. He used stories to separate those that were serious about knowing him from those who weren't. Because those that are serious, they're going to dig in, and that digging actually builds them up for the answer. So for people who truly want to know, they will have the eyes to see that it's in the stories. You can see that God wants to take responsibility for aligning people who trust him like this. Gary and I knew that, and we stayed in that lane until God lined us up. But while we're in that lane, we're also taking interest in what Paul said about singleness, that it's the time of undistracted devotion with Jesus Christ, who
Very true.
is our first love.
Yeah.
I don't know why we're giving ourselves away to other loves while the first love is standing there with us the whole time, watching us give our affections away to the left and to the right and striving and getting our heart broken. And let's get healed up so we can go back and do it again. I know that Gary and I kind of joke a little bit about if you were a good parent that wants to give good gifts, just like God does. He wants to give good gifts to his children. And he gave you the opportunity to write out your children's love stories. He said, I want you to write it out. I want to know in that scenario, how many heartbreaks are you going to write?
Right to your children. Ooh, that's good.
Right? None. I'm not going to, I don't want that to happen for them. And it doesn't have to happen for them. So then if I can trust him to align me with someone who fits me, then my singleness is freed up to love and enjoy him and be built up and be prepared and find purpose. And that's when this is celebrated.
What's so interesting is how the consequences of not doing it God's way are so tremendous. By the time someone graduates high school, they're already emotionally like broken.
Yeah.
Like they're going to be a mess of a husband and a mess of a wife by the time they're 20, 90% of the time, because they've given their heart away so much. And this is another subject that parents almost feel helpless on, because they're like, well, it's kind of what happened to us, like the bullying thing. Like, we were bullied. What's wrong with that? It's like, yeah, it also created psychos. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, we were bullied. You turned out fine. However, have you really considered your mental issues? And it's like, bullying's not good. So this and you watch the girl that you loved and you had the soundtrack playing in your head dating someone else a week later, and and the madness and these massive definitions of men and women by the time you're 20, and it's all built off your horrible experience from dating in high school. And one of the most toxic things to a young mind rising up is genuinely disappointment. And I think it's interesting that the pain of being in a bad relationship has been kind of undermined, and and churches will just say, there's ups and downs. It's just like, no, we're talking about people ended up in prison because they're they flip completely out. Like the relationships wear on you and they take chunks of your heart and perspective away when you're in the wrong one. And I know right now the big thing is narcissism. I see narcissists everywhere. And I'm just like, well, that's kind of a narcissist. It's kind of like American culture.
It is.
We're a nation of narcissists. And that's concerning, because we know that the principles that narcissism lives by, we know that the principles, we know how important relationship is. We know how much the devil hates relationship. And to find out the solution to a healthy relationship is how your single journey is.
Yes. Yeah.
It seems like that's what you guys are emphasizing on.
Yeah. Fulfilled marriages come from a fulfilled single life. So if I am living a single life, fully understanding and experiencing that I am fully loved by Christ, and I mean fully loved by Christ. Nobody sees me like he sees me. Nobody knows me like he knows me. And nobody has died for me. He's the only one who did it so that he could love me. If I'm in that relationship, then when I'm looking, I can wait for his best, and I'm coming into that relationship ready to give as opposed to get.
Yeah. Now, Gary, I got a question for you. Like, as a man, the relationships, we do the women do this, men do this thing, when you were on this journey, what was it that led you to say, I want to see what God has to say about this, versus, what the guys at the bar say, versus, because usually men look to other men for advice. What do I do? How do I talk to women? What dating app? I don't, whatever it is. But how did you avoid going to another person and deciding, I want to see what God has to say about this?
Well, it came out of conviction that I was tired of doing it myself because it never worked. And what I found out that once I reached the point to say, okay, God, this is yours. I'm done. I'm done with me. I'm done with trying to do it myself. Quite frankly, God put a protection around me. He guarded my singleness for me until the right person came along. So I cooperated with him, but he did the heavy lifting. He was the one that carried me through that stuff. And when there were opportunities that came, and I thought, well, maybe this is it. Instead of pursuing this person, I would pray over them. And I would ask God, show me what you're doing before I jump into this like I did in the past. And he was faithful. And it doesn't mean that it came in 15 minutes, but at some point he always revealed, this is not your best. And I equate that to where Adam was given a job in Genesis to name the animals. And if you recall, the reason why God did that is to show him he was alone and didn't have a partner. So you could stretch the idea a little bit and say Adam was looking at the wrong partners, because the conclusion was there was no one for me among these animals. So I think that God will allow you to see the wrong people, but the way you find out isn't to jump in and dive into a relationship with them or date them. You observe them. That's all you need to do. As you're praying for them, you just watch them, and God will show you what you need to see.
Yeah. So I didn't do any of that. I didn't do any of that. That sounds like, where were you 20 years ago, bro? Not cool. I blame Gary for everything. It's that wisdom is so needed. I guess this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do the interview so bad, because I know that there's pretty much, because this has been so untouched, it's just a vicious cycle that our young people and our families are experiencing. And so until we have this conversation with the masses, it's just going to keep happening, because the same way that we watched a generation where they didn't know what to do, but they stayed married and they figured it out and they matured into this couple, and they went through the nightmares. But after, I want to say the 60s, 70s, 80s, the divorce rate started to increase. And this is where things start to fall apart, and we watch the fabric of family being, destroyed. And I do believe you guys are talking about the core reason of why, and it's when you don't know who you are, how can you, and I know they say marriage is 50-50, and it's like, no, it's 100-100. It's like, no, if you don't know who you are, you're not going to bring any real value to the relationship. If anything, you're going to tear the fabric of the relationship apart. Does that sound right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, you were talking about singleness. That's where you get this. Is if romantic love is a gift that God brings to you, singleness is just as much a gift. So during the singleness is when, I think Kim alluded to that a little bit earlier. During your singleness is when he instills all that stuff in your life. So singleness is really a preparation. Not the, singleness isn't meant for you to find someone. It's meant for God to get you ready to receive someone.
Oh man,
that's
you're like destroying every romantic story on the market.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the way he does it. That's what we discovered when, studying the scriptures for this subject. That's what we learned, that he does this, and it's intentional. It's not purpose. It's on purpose. So, the striving during our singleness just doesn't need to be at all.
And it's always so sad. It's always so sad, because you can see the real good intentions in the beginning. Like, these two people are attracted to each other for various reasons, right? And then you watch the puppy love phase, and then but then there's a part where conflict shows up, and they haven't even discussed how they handle conflict. And then, like, while in the relationship, you find out that he's a wall puncher, that he punches holes in the wall. And then you find out, you know, that she throws frying pans, and it's like, oh, so now we're practicing martial arts in the relationship, and or someone exaggerates, and and it's so weird. Because in every other place in our lives, we know we have to be educated in to do a good job at it. But for some reason, with relationship, we're like, nope, we're human. We got this. This is the one thing we're going to get right.
So,
what is that?
So bouncing on top of that, you spoke of education. So, the second most important decision outside of trusting Christ for salvation is who you're going to marry. And so we go to college, we go to tech school, we get all training and all kinds of things. And this one subject, the second most important subject, is completely neglected. Biblically speaking, there's all kinds of advice in the world, but it's completely neglected. And so you go to churches, big churches, mainstream churches, and this stuff, like you said, is silent. It's just not there. So we don't teach and educate people as a whole for this most important subject in life outside of Christ himself. It's neglected. It's silent. And, what's the problem with that? Well, I guess we're here to try to change that.
No, you guys are massively important right now.
If we're going to continue to pursue love and romance like the world does, we're going to continue to have the world's results. That's why you see the divorce rate being mirrored in the church with the world, because we're still approaching love and romance in the same manner as the world. We can only get the world's results.
So I'm going to tell you a humiliating story, which I'm really good at.
Turn it up.
So one day I just come out of a bad relationship, and maybe 3 weeks later, I'm telling God, I'm like, God, never again until you send this woman. And I'm at this church, and we've got the coming soon Jesus display out there, and I'm at the church, and I'm really just focusing on God. And I tell God, God, I'm done with dating until I know without a doubt that you sent her to me, that she comes from you. And right when I said that, this woman comes walking down the corridor and comes up, and and I'm like, wow, that was amazing. All I had to do is trust you, God.
For 2 minutes.
For 2 minutes, everything in me, the moment was right, the timing was right. She came out of nowhere. She's gorgeous and smart and witty, and I'm pretty awesome. And I'm like, it just makes sense. And then we get into this. I actually tell her, I said, hey, listen, I hope this doesn't freak you out, but I just told the Lord this. And she was just like, wow, I'm going through the same thing. And we go out to lunch, and it was just like, let's do it. Let's really connect. And it was a total nightmare. I mean, it was 6 months of just chaos and craziness. And I'm like, God, this is what you wanted for me? And it's so amazing how not one time did I ever step back and say, hey, man, maybe that was you wanting to see that. And I think the reason why is because when it comes to the issue of love, we're always like, well, that's God, because God is love. So it has to be God. This idea of God saying, no, wait on love. Of course he would never say that. And it's just like, no, not only would he, but he loves, no one's gonna love us better than him.
Right.
And that's I think that what both parties do, men and women do, is misinterpret his love and then put the expectation of the love that only he can provide on each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we disappoint each other, that's why we're like, feel so betrayed and ready for divorce and all of that, because we're literally looking at this person saying, you're not who I thought you were. But really what we're saying is, you're not God, and I thought you were.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke of, would God deny us love? Well, you know what? There is a time. It speaks in Song of Solomon of there being a time
Three
for
times, yeah.
for love, for romantic love, but it's always time for divine love.
Mm. And
So,
go ahead.
so well, again, there you go. That when Christ is your everything, when He has saturated your life, you're not going to look at that person and make them God, because
Right.
they're not, because they can never fulfill that. So it's always His job. And so then when you have this person in your life, you can allow them to be free to fail. You know, we fail, we blow things, we say things and do things we shouldn't sometimes. It's not a lifestyle, but you know, Kim has permission for me to be human. And she's not going to be God to me because she wasn't meant to be, but she is a huge part of what God has given me now. And so, but she's not God, and I'm not God to her. So when Christ is your everything in your singleness, He's going to be your everything when you're married. So it takes the pressure off.
Oof. Oof.
And I
'Cause
think
it's-
even I was going to say, in your circumstance that you just described, Duke, and Gary mentioned Song of Solomon, it says 3 times to not awaken love before it's time. And you just described the perfect scenario. You let attraction and affection lead you. You awoken it right away, and that's what you followed, when actually we've been warned 3 times, don't awaken love before it's time. Well, when
yeah.
is the time? When God says it's time.
Yeah. So I beat myself up enough about that, so we don't have to keep repeating. I'm kidding. No, but you're exactly right. So, and I want to say something too about that, because I don't get the privilege of saying I didn't know that. I did know that. And I was like, maybe this is, of course, and this is why we have to be very careful, because it hasn't been talked about. And then the scripture will be so blatant like that about it. And then we're like, but my relationship with God is so different that this doesn't apply to me. You see what I mean? We can take liberties because
Yeah.
it's love subject, is love, and we can take liberties, and the scripture is there to protect us, not to hurt us, and not to control us. They're there to protect us. And what's interesting about God is that once you make up your mind that you're going to go in this direction, He's going to let you. I'm like, why didn't you send a million angels to stop me? And it's just like, no, you make your decisions. You're going to, deal with it. And so God does everything. I saw what He did with Cain, and He comes before the tragedy. Hey, don't do this. Don't go this way.
Right.
I wish someone had told me what you said about observe before you. So even if let's say the storyline is true, like she comes down the aisle, it could have been like, let's observe one another.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be, let's get into this thing. Let's do this, start a family. Because I'm going to say something pretty brutal, and you guys do not have to back me up but usually, because you're like, okay, he just click off, just because because this thing is so real. And what happens when we end up not embracing our singleness and end up in a wrong relationship? The tragedy is we go through the motions, have the children, and now we have children being born in a hateful home, born in dysfunction. And in a lot of cases, the parents don't even like the children. They're just doing their duty.
Yeah.
And it becomes just more unloving, right? And now it just the next generation it becomes, and now we have a generation that's terrified of marriage.
Yes.
And it's all because no one taught people how to embrace singleness.
Right. Yeah. There's a study, and I can't name it off the top of my head, but I think it's called Communio, actually did a survey of young people and in this issue of why they're avoiding marriage. And it said, the results of the survey said it's not that they are afraid of commitment. They are afraid of making a wrong choice. And here's the reality. If God is taking the lead, who is a perfect leader, by the way, and He's the one who is identifying the best fit for you, there is no fear of making the wrong choice because you've given your choice to Him. And so his choice comes to you. It eliminates the fear. But we have to build up the understanding and the foundations first of who he is for each and every one of us, how much he loves us, that if we were to never marry, we could have an absolute fulfilled, abundant life without marriage.
Yeah.
And then if marriage comes, we're prepared because he has filled us to that point and prepared us to that point. And he's identified the person. I don't need to be afraid. I just follow his voice.
You, yeah, and this is where I think, oh man, I'm gonna get in a lot of trouble. You guys, well, because this subject is need to be talked about, but it's and we just haven't, and so we got to deal with it. We're gonna deal with it, but this is where I think we've got to be more supportive of youth pastors, because this is a great time to have that conversation, because this is the hormones are insane.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's just like, and you don't see church culture really celebrating singles.
No.
And it's like these are the guys that you can send on world mission trips and things like that. And and we're not really understanding the value that singleness brings to the body of Christ, to the church, in their maturity. And as they have these single experiences, it turns them into better mothers and fathers, because they now have a worldview. But if we're talking about coming out of high school, looking for love, or going to college and finding love, like, man, we're already in such a, psychologically, selfish mode. We're already ill-equipped for a relationship because we're so me-minded.
Yeah. Yeah.
When do you think this particular conversation is appropriate for the church to introduce to young people or singles at all? How do we introduce this to the church?
Gary and I are storytellers. We like the idea of actually bringing in a story of a divine match. Ours is one of those stories. I think approaching tweens and teens with an enchanting story of love that God arranged and is true is a great way to bring the inspiration for them to see for the first time, if they haven't already seen it in the Bible, but to see in real life what God can do. Already sets a value to this thing called love and marriage, where I don't have to strive. I don't have to make be alone in making my own choice and trying on all these people. God, I heard a story.
Wait, did you say trying on all these people?
Yeah.
That needs to be, that could replace dating.
Yeah.
I'm going to try on this person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that sounds more realistic to what actually happens.
So I think if kids in high school, junior high, are actually exposed to divine love stories that are in the Word and that have really been fulfilled today, that already elevates the value of love and marriage and God's purpose in it. I think once you're in high school and as a young adult, actual instruction coming in on how to wait, how to embrace your singleness, I think those are all great points. We would love to get in front of those age groups and start with that inspiration and then come in with the education.
Also, let me add, the young kids need this modeled before them.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be ideal if the parents were living this out in front of them, but also that the parents are teaching them, because Disney's going to teach them if the parents aren't. So
so true.
Well, just because the culture is so immersed in the wrong things, so the parents need this as much as anyone, so they can begin to raise their kids up under this kind of thing. So youth pastors, singles pastors, I don't think you can really introduce it young enough, but how deep you want to go with it. Obviously the older they get, the more you can go and teach them the specifics of it. But so in the home, is
Yeah.
where it really should start. And we are all there for pastors and leaders of churches also to get a hold of it, so they can begin to shape their church culture in this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that the church as a whole, when I think about Genesis 12 and God told Abraham to leave his father's house and go into a land that I will show thee, and he goes, I'll bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you, and through you all families of the earth will be blessed. So the covenant that God makes with Abraham is this promise that all families are going to be blessed. And so we know for a fact that family means something to God. And interesting enough, out of the gate, Genesis, we see the relationship was attacked. And of course, some people look at it from the perspective of Adam throwing Eve under the bus. I've heard people use it from the perspective of him standing with his wife, saying, "This woman you gave me the fruit, and I did eat." And he's standing with her. I just recently heard that perspective, which me being the hopeless romantic that I am, I'm like, yeah, that's the one. But either way, the relationship with God was torn, and then you see God trying to warn Cain. And Cain goes off, and even he finds a relationship, and and then you have the fallen angels, and then they end up in a relationships, and it's just like, wow, man, this is no matter how bad a person is, it's like this love concept is still there. Joker has Harley Quinn, but so it's interesting that this relationship concept is so important, so embedded in our humanity. But then when you look at the divorce rate, we can clearly see that something is terribly wrong, particularly in our country that's supposed to be so advanced, and we're supposed to be so blessed. But why is it that the biggest place where God said the blessings would be for our family, all we see is divorce and dysfunction?
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that the struggle that we're confusing singleness with loneliness?
Oh, yes. So being alone and being lonely aren't the same thing at all. You can be alone, and again, I keep coming back to it, but when Christ is there, when he is residing, and when you are delighting in him, you're not lonely. You're not lonely at all. I was single a long time, and I had a few little bouts occasionally, but I did not live lonely. Even though I was alone, I lived alone. I worked alone. Everything I did was alone. It seemed like alone and my name was the same thing, the same definition. But I learned, and I didn't, I wasn't that way when I was younger. I wasn't
Right.
content at all, but I learned it. Paul said, we learn to be content. We're not born that way. We learn it. And as I learned it, really it was Jesus. He fills you up. He fills you up if you believe him, if you let him, if you allow him to do so. He wants to. So in doing that, your loneliness fades.
Mm-hmm.
It stops. Right. And then you can be married and be lonely. You can be in a crowd of people and be lonely. So they're not the same thing.
Not at all. And that's one of the things that I'm concerned about is, you don't, and I guess that maybe it's because there isn't a movie to tell. Maybe there isn't a movie like this guy's single. Let's tell his story. It's just like, but I think that's because of the fact that there's the confusion of singleness and loneliness. Like there are great adventures that you go on. You can develop a worldview. And I think it's so, I guess the saddest part to me about it is that the church doesn't discuss it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's and the world really is just taking charge and leading and shaping our ideology of what a relationship is.
Yeah, 100%.
If you go into any church, you're going to see the priority is for the youth. The priority is for the seniors. The priority is for the kids. And the priority are for families, most likely young families. the singleness are the most neglected group of people in American churches. And it's that way across the board.
Yes.
And so we have a heart for singles. We were single a long time, and we have a heart for them. And we think that they need to be celebrated, like you said earlier, celebrated and loved where they are, and trained up where they are, and encouraged where they are,
Mhm.
and allow God to do this matching business, allow him to do his thing.
And to stop pointing at the absence of a partner, the absence of a mate. I mean, there's so many times where, we've been in a church and there's been an announcement that there's a men's retreat coming up, and no, ladies, it's not for you. The singles always end up being a joke at some point.
Yeah.
Put them in this identity of always being in need of a partner. They're not always in need of being a partner. They are always in need.
Because this is so countercultural, guys.
It is.
That this is very countercultural. This is one of the reasons why I'm so supportive of you, because I'm like, you guys are in a pioneering situation. You're not in a situation of that. This is, well, I believe that God has put a corrective anointing on you for this generation, and thank God, because he, that's his judgment to do that. But after 400 years of this nation, and 250 years being a nation to be exact, but in that short amount of time, to see the decay of our families, and it's because of this, and I think there was this overdrive, like in America, when we first started this country, it's like, we got to establish the country. How do we do that? Make babies. It doesn't matter. Make the babies, you know what I mean? Slavery and making babies, whatever. And you got families of 22 kids. I mean, like, this nation was booming when it started. Let's get some immigrants over here, make babies, slaves. We got it. Let's work that magic. And then, and then it's like, okay, we got enough. But now it's like, what type of families do we have? We have broken families. Yeah. We have, because we didn't emphasize love, and we didn't emphasize, and the saddest part about that is that the love that was emphasized was still very, male chauvinistic in a way. You got to know how to talk to a woman. You got to know how to get a woman, and so that becomes degrading. And then you have the women's liberation. Well, I don't need a man at all. I mean, America has failed in this area.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to accept that. Maybe we make great technologies, but we were not trained very well on how to build a family.
Yeah.
And I think that your ministry is going to help guide us to a place for the first real time.
I appreciate that. One of the things that when I was single, and I had a promise from the Lord shortly after my daughter was born, that there would be a man who hears God's voice. He gave me a promise of a husband. So I stayed in that lane. There was a promise. And then inside that lane was me coming to fall in love with Jesus and come to know my purpose. And now I completely forgot where we were going with that.
I do that to people all the time. I cause that.
What were you saying right before that?
No, I was just saying how America, there's a corrective ministry on you.
Corrective. I appreciate that, because in the process of falling in love with Jesus, he gave me a promise, because you can only wait so long before you're about to faint, and then you need more encouragement. And he told me the reason that my wait was so long is because he was writing a love story with my life that, when heard, would turn the moral compass of a generation. That was the promise. And so I really appreciate you saying that, because I believe that's very true.
It is, because God told us through his word that he'll send prophets, apostles, teachers, and preachers. You know what I mean? And it says, for the perfecting of the saints, not for the world.
Right.
For the perfecting of the saints. So when I see correction, I know that that's something that only believers would really respond to. And in this particular subject, I know how horrible my relationship situation was, you know what
Mhm.
I mean? And I know how I felt. I was very aware of how I felt and what I desired. Like the desire to have a godly relationship and a godly home was real.
Yeah.
The know how to do that was completely not there. It was like trying to get, you're in the negative in the bank, you're still trying to get money out. And it's like, dude, the ATM is telling you insufficient fund. You know what I mean? And it's just like insufficient knowledge. You know what I mean? The knowledge is not there. And, because the discipleship isn't there in the
Right.
particular subject. Um, and so with me, like you, for one, you guys are stuck with me. I know Gary loves this, but like, you guys are stuck with me because it's like I'm gonna get you in trouble. I'm trying to put you in front of as many people as possible to make sure they get this message, because it's not, when I think about singleness, it's not just the kids, but parents watch their kids suffer.
Yes.
And just so the audience understands, we're not if you're in a relationship, we're literally, if you're in a miserable relationship, we're talking about the steps you needed to take before you got there. And the other thing is that I watch parents devastated when they find out that their child has killed themselves because
Mm.
they didn't know how to get over heartbreak.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to pretend like this is a light subject when kids actually, commit suicide because it hurts so bad.
Sure.
And they go into drink. A lot of drinking is
Right.
introduced. This is where you start coping with it, because I don't know if girls know this or not, but when dudes get their heart broken, it it is, we physically get sick and we have to kind of act like we didn't care. We're always holding back tears, got a frog in your throat, you know, and we stay there, and, then and we learn how to bury it, and we're like, I never want to feel that again. Uh,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, again, that, like I said, that happens usually before you even get out of high school.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of power that men and women or young people have over each other's minds and bodies.
Yeah.
And I'm still a little confused on why the church wouldn't see it.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's what Gary said when I allowed him to talk. Uh, I, I think it's what you said, Gary. When you said that it's not only just been neglected, but it's like the we follow the culture, and we let the culture lead the way in relationship in this conversation. And it made me, when you said that, it made me think of Psalm 1 that says, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly.
Mm. Yeah. Ouch.
And we get so much of our relationship counsel from the ungodly.
We do.
Yeah, the way you get rid of error is you don't empty your mind. You have to replace it with the truth. So it's the culture will sweep you up like a tidal wave if the truth isn't, if you're not rooted in the truth. And learning this kind of thing, when the culture would come at me after having been established, I stood firm. I could walk in the opposite direction of the crowd. That's the confidence that Christ gives you once you understand who he is, first of all, who he is and the way that he works when you see this. But the culture will eat you alive, because I call it the loudest noise. We follow the loudest noise because that's all we know, because there's been no exposure to anything else. And so that's actually what our first episode is. A lot of it's about is bucking the trends, bucking the culture, and understanding that the romantic world is completely dictated by the culture today.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, and to all my 80s babies out there, like I'm a 70s baby, and like we all know what happened. When MTV came out, I mean, that became, the construct of where we learned about love and relationship,
Mm.
and all the movies just had these great, and then the amount of, I think, till this day, like romance novels are still at the top, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and it's just, they made it, seem more magical than and through exaggeration, then the maturity that's required. They
Mhm.
didn't promote the maturity that's
Yeah.
required, because who wants to watch that movie?
Yeah.
Without exaggerations and this and that, and the undermining of the truth at how unstable feelings are.
Mhm.
The secular world does a great job of saying, trust your feelings. She's the one. That's our song. How do we get people to realize, when is it okay to trust your feelings?
Never.
Yeah. I was
No,
rooting for you, man. I was hoping you said it. I was rooting for you.
That was
Not
a
the other part.
setup.
no, that's obviously not true. You have to understand what emotion is. Emotion is something that responds to something else. So emotion, you can go into a movie and know that this movie is fabricated. It's a script, and there's nothing real about it. But all the women are crying, over something that isn't true. I could tell you stories of times I've gotten very angry over something that wasn't true. So emotions will feed off something else. So you can't put those at the center of what you're trusting in. You have to put yourself at the center, first of all, of the written truth, and the things that God speaks to you. Those are like Kim said, she had a promise. Her emotions went probably through those years, went all over the place. So, but she was centered on the truth always. That's the standard. That's where you dig your hole. That's where you hang your hat, is on the truth. And you let the emotions do what they're going to do. Sometimes you have to dismiss them completely, and other times you get to enjoy them. This is very pleasant. This is fun. When we got engaged, we finally let the emotions go and enjoyed them for what they were. But to put them, these songs, these ideas, how she makes me feel and stuff. Okay, that's cool, but man, you can't hang your hat on that every day, all day, because the emotions. Not if you trust your emotions, you're going to be all over the map. You'll be someone different today, someone different tomorrow, because they're unstable. They cannot be relied upon as the truth. The truth is the truth.
And I think you bring those emotions and those feelings back to the secret place of prayer and communion with your Father, who
Okay.
knows you best.
So how do we do this? How do we, do we have a conference? How do we get you to have this conversation? Like, are there plays set? What do we have to do to get this conversation? Everybody, I want to, you guys got to share this conversation, because it it's it it is so critically important to the development of our nation, to the empowerment of our churches. But if we want to see this tragedy of what's happening to America, we're about almost at 50% of marriages ending up in divorce. I think we're right at 40. You know what I mean? Even 30, it's like we're talking about marriages, family, folks, like 30%. But I do know that we're at 40% of divorces. And I genuinely think and I know you guys know this, but it's directly connected to, you know, our misunderstanding of singleness. I mean, I think that is where the tragedy is coming in. The enemy knows it. It hasn't been talked about, but revival in relationship is here, folks. Now, I do have to ask you this. How does a person find value in themselves, in a world where you see these relationships, and matter of fact, how do you, like, for so long we were defined by our relationships.
Uh-huh.
How do you help a person be confident to be single and say, hey, it hasn't happened, I'm not gonna force it? How do you get someone to be that kind of confident?
Well, I first direct them to know God, know him as a good father who would actually, like Gary said, veil you and guard you because he's jealous. over your life. He's jealous over your attention. He's jealous over your affections. And everything in him, his thoughts towards you are pure and they're holy. That relationship has to be established, it has to grow, and it has to be enjoyed. Then you walk in the confidence where everyone else around you is helping themselves to relationship. You now have an understanding that I have been veiled, for one. That's a completely different.
Whoa.
I am
That's
being
cool.
cherished by a good father. But I can't fake that. I have to actually have a relationship with him first to know him like that, to find that in the word. One of the books I wrote is called Veiled Unto His Pleasure. And it is, it's a devotional where I just pulled out revelatory thoughts that I got while I was in relationship with Jesus, because that was what was establishing my value. I came into relationship with God full of self-hate. Never thought that somebody was going to be able to love the likes of me. But when I got to know him and how he saw me and how he felt about me, I became cherished. I started to understand how valuable I was to my father. Now I can trust him to fit me with the best one. So when everyone else is having relationships around me, I look and I'm like, I don't want that one. And I don't want that one. I want the one for me. And I'll give you a story. I was working at my church. I was an administrative assistant to my pastor who oversaw about 19 churches in our denominational district in Central Illinois. One morning, a gentleman came into the church. He was new to the church, and he went to have a conversation with the pastor. As he exited, my pastor came in, who'd been praying for me to get married. And he said he wanted to tell me I really needed to meet this guy. And I said, why? And he said, because he's a really nice guy. And immediately it sprung up in me. I'm like, I don't want a nice guy. And my pastor looked at me like, what's wrong with you that you don't want a nice guy? And I was like, yeah, what's wrong with me that I don't want a nice guy?
Duke, I'm not very nice.
I was just like, Gary says a lot about you. Yeah.
So I just took that experience back to God, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why did I respond that way? And all I could think was, to me, nice is boring. I don't really want nice as the pinnacle of my choice. And God revealed to me through that experience that what I really, really wanted was a daring man of faith. Mm-hmm. Everybody else is a shadow until I encounter that one man who's a daring man of faith that fits me. So watching everybody else enjoy their relationships and suffer in those relationships, I could stand alone knowing I am cherished. God has the best for me, and I'm willing to wait for it because nice is not enough anymore.
You know what's funny about that is that I would get jealous. You know, of course, Facebook does this to you. Social media does that. I would see all these great relationships, and they're in Florida, they're here, and they're just happy, and they're this and that, and then I realized, like, wait a minute, I know these people. They're miserable. What am I doing? They took a great picture by a palm tree, you know, like this. And I'm like, I'm buying it. I'm like, I just talked to them last night. They're on the verge of divorce. What is wrong with me? You know, but because social media will make you think that
you're missing out.
Yeah, you're missing out and this and that. And, you know, and unfortunately, it's interesting the way it plays out, because when you're going to school and you're in that box, you feel like I've got to find my true love in high school. And we already know that when that person goes to college, because, you know, whoever stays back is like, now they're calling less, and then the breakup happens. And I got my, when I joined the Army, I got my Dear John letter, you know what I mean? And I was just, you know, and I thought the drill sergeants were prophets, because they were like, hey, this relationship is not going to last. It was a high school thing. And I'm like, she loves me. And no, she didn't. She didn't at all. As soon as I was out of there, it was just like, oh, I can, you know, think about something else. And I'm like, I joined the military for a relationship. You know what I mean? Like, and this is where I think, you know, people genuinely, you know, that zeal, that youthful zeal, you know, we, instead of aiming that towards God, we aim it towards relationship. And then when we're devastated, then it's just like, honestly, it affects our ability to trust God once we've done it backwards.
That's what I was going to say. It wears the will. Our will gets worn out, and our ability to put our faith and trust in someone, it weakens because we keep giving it away and it keeps failing. That relentless disappointment does wear out a person.
Yeah, yeah. And I know we're out of time because we're out of time because I talk so long. But I do have to, when we do the next interview, we are going to have to bring up, the effects of sex and what that does, to affect your singleness and how that affects you, because I think that that's a big part of, especially for a believer who's just like, oh, I can't stop having sex, so I must get married. And it's just like, or you could try discipline, you know what I mean? Or you
Right.
could try running to God. But I'm sorry, everybody, we're out of time. This is going to be our second episode, so we have to break it down into two. But I told you this was going to happen, by the way. But this is such a great subject, guys. We're going to break right here, and I'm so excited. But I need everyone to know how to get your website and information. That's important.
godoftheromantic.com.
godoftheromantic.com. I'm going to put this up here so everybody can see it.
And we've got 3 books available. One is our love story. One, and that's called Violets in the Snow. The second is Gary's got a book called God of the Romantic, and it really lays out the principles on how to trust God. And then again, mine is Veiled into His Pleasure, which is a devotional that kind of acts as a companion book to Gary's. But this is Violets in the Snow. So this is the love story. So if this is a really foreign concept, start with the love story, and then definitely pick up the next 2 books, because they're going to equip you well for what God wants to do.
Now we are live right now, so we can continue. I just wanted to make that break for the first 2 episodes, but we are we can continue if you guys have time. I know Gary loves to hear me talk.
Duke, you're my new favorite talker.
One of my concerns is, how do you learn how to communicate? How do you, when you're doing the single thing, how do you learn how to communicate or prepare yourself for communication to someone once you end up in a relationship? Because once you go from singleness to relationship, it's no longer about you. So how do you deal with that?
I didn't quite understand what you were saying.
It's just to go from singleness. How do you transition from singleness to relationship? Because now it's no longer about you. It's, it's like, you didn't care if there was a little gulp of orange juice left, but the person you're with does. So how do you prepare for, how do you communicate from singleness? What's that transition like? Or is that
where your life is no longer your own?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think you first need to realize that it's no longer your own
to start with.
And then understanding that there's another person in the house, and that you need to respect them. Kim is very, very bad at leaving the lights on when she leaves a room. Mm-hmm. The whole house will be lit up if was
Gary
up
wasn't here.
And so I don't know, my habit was, you leave a room, you turn the light off, and it's not a big deal. And sometimes I'll joke her about it. I'll get the light for you, Kim, but so what? Most of the time I just turn them off and just don't say anything. She doesn't need to be nagged about that. Just bless her, no matter what. She's human. She's gonna do things that rub me wrong. I know I do things that rub her wrong. It's just self-respect and understanding that certain things you don't even need to bring certain things up. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
And just I'm gonna bless you and love you no matter what. And that's the mind of Christ. Mm-hmm. That He takes with us, so he overlooks. I mean, of course, He paid for all.
That's a big word. He overlooks a lot.
Yeah, he gives us a lot of grace for a lot of things, and doesn't shame us, doesn't condemn us, and we are to take the same attitude. toward each other.
I was going to say, in singleness, if we're talking about how a fulfilled single life contributes to a fulfilled married life, then as a single, Paul told us our lives are no longer our own. We're living for Christ. We're living with Christ. He's the head. He's taking the lead. And there's a lot of things that Jesus led me into that I had no interest in participating in.
Right.
But because of love, I did it. And my greatest interest was serving him and bringing pleasure to him. And when that relationship is already happening as a single, then you come in fully equipped for a marriage where now, again, my life is no longer my own, but that's not a foreign concept anymore.
Right.
Because it wasn't to start with.
Well, I love the conversation with the leaving the lights on. So in a situation like that, you're saying that you can develop a level of maturity
and selflessness
but without that, it's bother. Why is this wrong? Because now this is where whatever you came from. So in your family, Gary, they cut the lights out as soon as they left. Now you have reason for conflict. Yeah. Because if you don't do this, if you don't go through this process of singleness, so now I'm going, whoa, no wonder there's so much bickering in a relationship, especially if, because you guys kept using the word striving, and I'm like, what is that striving? That's what it is. It's like the striving for something to go right, right? And so then something goes right, the more control I have over it. And these are all mindsets developed from not having that maturity.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have that maturity, like Gary just breathed that in. He breathed that in. He was like, joker. But I'm like, yeah, but I've heard this conversation before. I've been in the saunas and dudes are just like, I don't know why she can't cut the lights out, man. They're ready to get divorced because she can't. I'm tired of telling the same thing. It's like, she's not a child, right? But they're so irritated. But that irritation is actually connected to not being developed.
Mm-hmm. And I would say let's just discern, how big of a deal is this?
But my thing is, so many small issues have affected relationships. So it's like, do I become dismissive? Because if I'm like, it's not a big deal, it's just the lights on. But to you, it's driving you insane.
And the understanding that we're here to love and serve one another, I think is you need to take that. She doesn't turn the lights off in a timely manner. And let me finish before I lose my thoughts. I have had the same situation with things that Gary does, and I'll look at that situation.
Don't do anything wrong, dude.
No, Gary, let her have her. Let her just say what she wants.
Delusional.
Let her just say. We know it's
I overlooked her delusion.
But there's things where I look at it and I'm like, I don't know that I need to address this and create a problem here. Maybe it's where I serve. Maybe this that looks like a weakness to me is just something that I serve. But if there is something that is really divisive, we have a conversation. We don't have a fight. We have a conversation about it. But I think a lot of those little things, are you sure that's not a place you're supposed to serve? Because we don't complete each other because we're complete in Christ, but we do cover each other. So he gets the lights for me, right? I wipe the crumbs off the counter after he's done. And there's not an issue. That's where I serve him and that's where he serves me.
I think it's real quick. I think it's really important to understand that neither one of us are being malicious when we do things like that. Kim isn't trying to get under my skin when she leaves a light on, or if I don't clean something up, or whatever, leave the refrigerator door open, or we're not trying to irritate each other by that. We're just, again, we're human. We don't catch everything. We make mistakes. We do things that aren't right always. That's okay. That's okay.
I think that once you're irritated, you don't realize you're looking through the lens of irritation. And so it's just like, she left these lights on to get at me. She's mad at me and she wants to drive me insane.
Right.
This is a plot to stress me out. I have a heart attack and she gets the insurance money. You know what I mean? Because that's what it sounds like, the exaggerations.
Figure it out, dude.
Right? We know. But I think that's what the issue is that we, we put our spouse or our mate as another person dismissing us or another person disappointing us. But that's really coming from not having time to put things in perspective.
Right.
Like, and I guess that's another question that I have for you guys is like, what do you do when, because obviously two people coming from two different worlds, and how do you take that time to communicate what certain words like family means or love? Because we can say the word love, but what does love mean to you? When do you have that conversation? When do you make those definitions in your singleness? This is what love is to me, or this is what family means to me. When do you set those times up so that in going into relationship, you have a kind of an idea or a set idea? When do you do that?
So are you talking about when we know that God has us for each other, then we talk about what love looks like and what family looks
It's
like?
both. When do you develop it in singleness? And then when do you have that conversation when you find someone?
I think in singleness, I think we learn a lot when we're serving one another in our churches, when we're serving in our friendships, when we're serving in our families. I think that those are the opportunities where we learn, what blesses us, what irritates us, how we want to do things different, how we want to do things well. I think that we're already, as singles, surrounded by community, whether it should be in the church, but family and friends. And in that kind of community is where we're learning how we're wired and how we're to respond. We get to practice forgiveness in those relationships. We don't, it's just so easy anymore to just unfriend people and stop having relationship and never dealing with the conflict. We've got to stay in committed relationships in those areas alone. And that is going to develop us relationally for our marriage. So understanding how much I've been forgiven by Christ enabled me to forgive family, friends, people I went to church with, keeping commitments with family and friends. How about just getting into a ministry at the church and finding out this is really irritating, but I made a commitment for 3 months. So I'm going to learn how to serve, even though it's not my passion. So to the single part, that's where I think a lot of that is developed.
Elijah Henderson has a question for you guys.
Yeah.
He says, so Gary and Kim, I have PTSD and often do and say things that I shouldn't in my relationship, or I'm overbearing when my lady's late without calling me because of my mind goes to the worst case scenario, which I totally understand. And I overreact a lot. But what do we do when it's a mental health issue that causes the disruptions, but she gets tired of always just understanding?
Aw.
Oof.
Yeah. You got something?
Well, we're not really equipped to deal with mental health issues, but find someone that is.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know the relationship, if this is a married relationship or a dating relationship, but I think there's a real fear factor involved there, because he said he goes to the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
But we all do that.
We all do that.
Sometimes.
And I think that I know for myself, where I've been in a couple of situations where I was fearing the worst case scenario. All right. Thanks, Elijah. Married.
Yeah.
Is go ahead and go to the worst case scenario. And it may be in this situation, the worst case scenario is she is going to divorce me. I'll go there with the Lord. What if she did? What is going to be the fallout? What is going to be the experience? And deal with it in prayer with the Lord and get rid of that fear. Who's in charge of the relationship? Are you in charge of the relationship? Is she in charge of the relationship, or is God?
Yeah.
Can God be trusted in that relationship? I think a lot of times what we're dealing with is fear, and then fear has to be addressed and defeated by faith in relationship with the Lord. Go to the end of that thing. Are you going to be okay if that's even what happens? I think when you find peace with the worst case scenario, you can find peace moving forward into that relationship.
Yeah, and I think also, so with the mental health situation, I do speak to that because of for several reasons. One, I've seen how relationships affect the mind. You know,
Mhm.
it affects people's minds. Um, and you know, Elijah, he's a brother of mine, and I love him very much. And we both come out of the military, and
Okay.
there's an intensity that we do bring. You know, whereas if you haven't been in the military, you're like, okay, you guys are nuts. You
Yeah.
know, there's an intensity that we bring that we have to learn. And of course, I even raised my children kind of militant in a sense. And now they're older, they just ran from me, and I'm like, what? I thought we were a team. You know, it's like, they're like, no, you thought you were raising soldiers. Like, you know, they're like, we're for you, man. And so the deal is, you know, that when we get in these relationships, we have to remember a lot of times that nothing is promised, right? So
Mhm.
you get married when you have this idea, but what happens if a car accident happens and you guys thought you were going to climb Mount Everest, and now you're pushing the person you love in a wheelchair for the
Yeah.
rest of their life? So these things happen. And so mental illness is a real thing, and I know we're just scratching the surface on it, but it does weigh on the relationship. This is where I tell couples, listen, guys, don't doubt what God can do.
Right.
Create systems of communication that can work around these things. Create systems of communication that help you maneuver through it. Be creative. Use creative ways to stay in love, stay engaged, and like I said, work around these things. Elijah has a response for you. He says, like, you can read it. I guess my fear is more so I think when she's late, things don't happen on schedule. That's something terrible. And had it happened, a car accident or worse. Yeah, I got you. Out of
Yeah.
90% of the time, she is just running late.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so in that situation, I mean, I've had times where Gary isn't showing up and I don't know where he's at, and I think he should be home by now. And what's the worst case scenario? There's been an accident and he's passed away. Worst case scenario. Am I going to be okay? I'm going to be okay if that was true. And it hasn't been true, but I think it's about coming to the end of that fear, get a hold of it, and don't allow it to have control over you anymore. And it's practicing this. I'm not saying this is instantaneous because things come at us all the time. Gary was in the hospital with COVID, and he had some of the circumstances in his physical health that were looking like he's going to be on a ventilator and I'm going to lose him. And we'd only been married a couple of years. And so here I've got fear that I'm going to lose the man I've been waiting for forever. And I had to come to the end of, what if I did? Am I going to be okay? And embrace the fact, yes, even in the worst case scenario, because of God, I'm going to be okay.
yeah,
And I like what you said too. Don't limit God. I think that even for Elijah's wife, it's the same. She's getting tired of always having to understand there is no limit to the love of Christ that is available for each other.
yeah, yeah,
The love of Christ does not end for Gary. There's no end to it. There's no end to God, to Christ's patience for Gary. And I have to tap into those when I'm at the end, and tap into what Christ is already feeling towards him. And again, that's a practice. It's not instantaneous, but it's practicing patience, practicing love, and drawing from Christ in those situations.
now I know that most people are struggling with the down times, you know, like let's use substance abuse, things like that. That definitely plays a toll on relationships. And I've seen two scenarios. I've seen the people that kind of walk through it with their mate and they go through it, and then I've seen the people that say I can't do this, and then and usually it's because it can get so dark. uh
Mhm.
and, and but I would love to know, uh is this something that can be foreseen in the singleness?
Mm.
uh like, when in that observation time, is this where you observe how much the person drinks, what type of drinker they are, what type of habits they have, how they even feel about? Is that the time to have that conversation in the singleness? Like, because I know we said that dating isn't really biblical, but uh, when do we have time to set those boundaries of what we're going to tolerate and not tolerate in that relationship? You know, like, do we do that in the singleness, or do we, you know,
Let's do it
like
on the other side. Well, I think friendship is the best place to be until revelation comes. I think that's the best quote unquote observation platform. Not that I wasn't friends with Gary to observe him, but as I was friends with Gary, the observation was taking place. And I think it's in the friendship that you're learning who that person is. I think sometimes more so than when you're dating them, because when you're dating, it's all motivated by affection and attraction and being your best every time you're together. But if you're just friends, you're just being yourself. There's no risk of romance being lost when you're just friends. And I believe that in the friendship is when the person is going to be their most authentic self. And that's where you learn the secrets. That's where you learn the things that they're struggling with. And that in that, then if they end up being the one that God reveals to you, then that guarantees he's going to grace you for that relationship.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Gary, go ahead.
Quickly, I think it's important to understand that like Kim already said, is this person right for me? Is God calling me to this person? And if he is, there will be all that's needed to walk through it with them. But you got to be careful with that as well, because I mean, if there are huge things like just anything huge, if that exists in a person, you might want to just back off, but then be sensitive to understand that we all come to the table not perfect, and we all come to the table with something of issue, but first of all, you got to settle, is this the right person for me? And if once you're there with that, then the conversation about some of these other things can arise. I think that's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally get it, because I know that we're coming, like I said, we're getting to such a toxic level of divorce. We can't afford another 20 years like this.
No.
And there's, and I'm watching it go from just relationship to like men and women hating each other, and the media exploiting that as well, versus us coming up with some real resolve. And that's why I believe that you guys are such a gift from God, and I can't wait to share your stuff. When I say I'm going to share your stuff, I'm talking about being rude about it. I'm talking about I'm going to share your videos to like couples that I know are crazy. I'm like, here. I'm sending it to everybody because it baffles my mind how everyone thinks they're so good at relationship and no one taught them. You know what I mean? And I know that we have done a massive amount of trying to heal relationships after the fact, but you guys with your books and what you're doing is trying to get it before.
Yeah, we want to be preventative for sure.
Preventative ministry. And so there's a corrective ministry, and then there's preventative ministry that's combined, which is so massive. Parents, listen to me. If you do not want to see your kids and of course you can't control your kids, but if you want to help them deal with being young and single and everything, versus letting them learn the hard way, which a lot of us, my parents like, go ahead, go out there and date. And I got body slammed left and right. They're like, what'd you think? Great, let's do it again.
Do it again.
Do it again, and just get beat up some more. And I'm a love bug too. So you got to remember, that's like my kryptonite. So it's very important, guys. If parents, if you don't want to see your children suffer through reckless relationships, and get connected with these guys. These guys are the real thing. And you guys, I know I'm being funny and everything, but if I have had something like this, I wouldn't have went through so much, just wasted time, tears, my dad joking me. That's probably the worst. When my dad joking me, like, look at you crying over another girl. Look at you. But it really, this love thing is such a big part of our life. And man, if I just think about some of the amount of families that would still be together if the foundation was understanding the value of being single.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
That is,
we were literally made for love. That's why we're driven toward it. That's why we're hungry for it. God created us for love, but we have replaced him with what's around us. And we've done that because we haven't been exposed to anything different yet.
yeah.
Been exposed to the fact he wants to be the answer. He created that craving in order to be the answer. When he becomes that answer, it changes the game completely. And I look at other relationships, and I look at my friendships, and I look at my future. Everything changes when that love relationship is happening vertically.
Yeah, guys, we need everybody to share this. Make sure you support their organization, their ministry, and like I'm trying to get you guys in front of the president. You know, like
We
this
love
is
the president.
yeah, this is we've got to get this taken care of. Like, we got to get this out there. We got to be loud about this, folks. We're gonna have a revolution in singleness, which is going to lead to a revolution in marriage, and family structure. And so, guys, we got to support these guys. We got to make sure their message gets out, because it is so critically important. And I think that you guys are such a blessing,
Thank you.
to take this on. But like I said, pioneers have pioneer problems. I'm pretty sure, that churches are terrified of you guys. Like, whoa. They're really willing to talk about this stuff.
Mhm.
And I would say pastors, because I know a lot of pastors, you guys watch my stuff. And so, pastors, get connected. Let's help build young adult ministries centered around this, where they can actually appreciate who they are and what God is doing to them, and not just rushing out there and making a mess of their life. So we're out of time. Again, we love you guys. And you guys got a promise to come back on. I promise I won't talk as long. Okay, that's not a promise. I have my fingers crossed. I'm looking right at Gary. He's like, we can end this now.
It's your show, Duke. You can talk all you want.
No, he was just but we're on the phone. I'm paying that bill. No, okay. By the way, I just want to make this clear that this is not a men and women separately issue. This is a us issue.
Yeah.
And I would even go as far as saying definitely a cultural issue here in America. And we've got to get our peace back. And that's only going to come from really putting God first in our identity. So we love you guys. Be good to each other. Make sure you go to godoftheromantic.com. This is going to be a great adventure. I'm so glad that I got to connect with you guys.
Yeah, we are too.
To help you. Now, when have you already picked a date for your show?
Yes. So the show is called Redeeming the Romantic. So it's addressing actually redeeming the message of the romantic biblically and your own hearts. So we're going to be addressing that across the board. And we are, the show kicks off April 24th at 6:30 p.m.
Wow, that's so exciting. You'll be able to check them out on Good View Network.
Yeah.
So if you get like weird fan mail, that's me. It's me. What about this? What about this? Like another question from the anonymous. I'm anonymous.
All right.
You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks, Duke.
Thanks, Duke.